Hello everyone. We are at Open Channels, Canales Abiertos, the 14th of January 2022. We are going to interview Michelle Hickson Cox, uh, are participating in this interview, Dr. Lowell Fiet and Dr. Matthew Schwarzman, and me, Mahatma Caituiro. First, I'm going to read a short biography of Michelle, first in English and then in Spanish, but the interview will be mostly in English. Michelle A. Hinkson Cox is an educator, playwright, producer, director, and artist researcher, specializing in Barbadian and heritage based work. Her professional training began at 1997 at the Barbados Community College, an institution to which she has returned to work in various capacities. She is a founding member of two theater companies in Barbados, Rima Artistic Consultants and Theater Services, Rima ACTS, and Bimprov. She has written and produced more than 15 original productions while at BCC, many of them in collaboration with the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. Michelle's work has been recognized internationally and she has been selected as a fellow of the London based Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce. Now in Spanish. Michelle Hinkson Cox es educadora, dramaturga, productora, directora y artista investigadora especializada en el trabajo de Barbados y basado en el patrimonio. Su formación profesional comenzó en 1997 en el Barbados Community College, una institución a la cual ha regresado una y otra vez desempeñando varios cargos. Es miembro fundadora de dos compañías de teatro en Barbados, Rima Artistic Consultants and Theatre Services, Rima Acts, y Beam Prof. Ha escrito y producido más de 15 producciones originales, muchas en colaboración con el Museo y Sociedad Histórica de Barbados. El trabajo de Michelle ha sido reconocido internacionalmente y ha sido seleccionada como miembro de la Royal Society for the Encouragement of the Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, con sede en Londres. Wow. Michelle has more than 30 years of experience in theater and in education of theater and arts. Before beginning the questions of the interview, I wanted to ask Lowell and Matt to first save their questions and their comments in order that I can select the other questions that remain for the second part. After you both ask your questions. Is that okay for you?
You want us to go first?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Or I can go first if you prefer.
Well, no. I've not read your.
I would
your
prefer.
question.
I would prefer Nilo if you went first.
Okay, very
Okay.
nice. First, Michelle, I wanted to ask you something about your history. I will read the paragraph that I sent to you in the email. Congratulations on this extensive artistic career and for being a meta panelist at Open Channels. To begin with, and with great curiosity about your history and work of more than 30 years of experience in different facets, contributing and participating in the performing arts of Barbados, tell us, please, in the first place, how do you define yourself as a Caribbean popular theater performer or theater practitioner?
Popular theater really informs my process of theater making. A lot of the work that I do is built on principles of active participation and aims to provide that kind of immersive experience for the audience so that you kind of get a better understanding of whatever topics are being explored. In more recent years, my work has focused on issues of um, historical significance, but I've also presented work that deals with issues around health, education, social issues, things like intergenerational work. So a lot of, actually, when I think about all the plays that I do, even the more mainstream type of plays, all of them still kind of have that process that is very informed by popular theater, both in terms of the actual process itself and the kind of issues that we're presenting.
Also, it would be great if you could tell us about your history of creativity within popular theater, as well as your first steps in theater and theater training. Also, I wanted to mention that these questions were proposed by Lowell Fiet.
Yes, I can hear Lowell's
I'm, I'm,
on.
did I say things like that? I don't know.
Yeah. Um, my exposure to theater started from, I guess, before birth. um,
Wow.
it's genetic. My father is Barbados's most prolific playwright, and he's been active in theater since the 1970s. Um, so I was born into it in a sense. I grew up listening to him on typewriters, Um, so it's definitely genetic. But my formal training would have started at Barbados Community College, like you said in reading the bio. And that was under primarily the tutelage of, she's now Dr. Yvonne Weeks. Um, and from there, I then went on to study at University of the West Indies. And that's where I think my current kind of philosophy of theater really was shaped at UB, because I was under the guidance of people like Raul Gibbons, Louis McWilliams, Dr. Daniel Lindsay, Ed Deshay, who is amazing in technical theater. So a lot of my philosophy of theater and my understanding of using theater as a teaching tool, particularly to understand self and our history and explore our histories, that really came from the 4 years that I spent at the University of the West Indies under those wonderful people who I call my mentors. Um, so that's kind of where I think my foundation is. I did go on to study again after that, but even the studying that I did after would have been informed very strongly by what I was doing at UB at that time.
Well, so it is in your veins.
Yeah.
Nice. Finally, for this part, uh, because the previous steps and ancestors, such as one so important, such as your father, must be honored, tell us, please, about the theatrical experiences more than what you just mentioned, transcendental events, plays that marked your artistic development, and what teachers, important figures, and special people inspired or inspire your artistic and educator work, please.
So there are critical moments literally at every step of my journey. Um, if I think about Trinidad, working with people like Raul, Louis, and Danny in terms of the performance side of it, just kind of understanding that theater is so much more than let's put this on a proscenium stage, and kind of investigating the other possibilities for space, going into very unconventional spaces, or perhaps even taking a conventional space and using it in an unconventional way. So they were very critical in reshaping my idea of what is theater to begin with. But I have to say that the things that really impacted my journey really strongly, again, would have been working with them, working also with Arts in Action in Trinidad, which is one of the Caribbean's leading applied theater companies. And then I would have worked also as a volunteer with National Trust London while I was doing my master's there. And that opened my eyes again to the possibilities of theater in a heritage and historical context. As a writer, I didn't grow up necessarily. I heard my father in theater, but I didn't grow up with him in theater. But I think as a writer, it was really important for me. The very first play that I wrote in 2014 was actually a play that I co-wrote with my father. It was based on one of his poetry anthologies. And it was very special for me to kind of enter this realm of writing through him. So we wrote that play together. It was stress. It was stress. I think one of the most stressful things for me even now is sending my work to my father for him to read it, because he is my harshest critic.
Wow.
But it really has been a fantastic journey being able to work with him while he's still alive, and being able to have that kind of interaction professionally with him, which I wouldn't have had as a child. But to be honest, every single one of the plays that I've written everyone is special to me. They all hold significance for different reasons from 2014 till now. But the one little thing that I'll say that is kind of a common thread through all of them that a lot of people don't know is that every single one of those plays actually incorporates a little nugget or two about my family, whether it's family members, the family history, the stories of the family, the practices of the family. Every play that I write for me is actually my way of archiving my own heritage.
Wow. I really admire the father figure. Also, my father is a very important figure and has been a very important figure in my development. Um, Now, please make your questions if you want, Matt and Lowell, or we can go to the second part as you wish, as you said. I will follow.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, Michelle, what do you think might be important or special about, particularly important or special about improvisation within the popular theater frame?
Several things. First of all, here in the Caribbean, we are built on oral traditions. And because of that, we're avid storytellers. Storyteller in itself is an improvisational art. So in terms of our own cultural identification, it's a part of who we are to be able to include improvisation. My students always laugh at me when I write plays because I tell them, okay, I've put the full stop, I've said the end. I don't remember anything in the script. So I don't know if you skipped a line. I don't know. And this is really bad teaching. But I always say to them, if you skip a line, I don't care. Improv, make it look like that's what I wrote, because that's a part of who we are as a people. We hear a story once, and if you hear that story 3 more times, it's going to be a different story each time. And I love that kind of freshness in the work. So it becomes, again, a part of my process. But also what is really critical for me in I guess more traditional forms of popular theater is that improv helps those participants, and I'm saying participants, not speaking about the actors, but everyone who is participating, even if you're coming in as a researcher, whether you're coming in thinking that you're an audience, that kind of incorporation of the improv helps you to kind of unpick the issues.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the kind of issues that you're dealing with, it also helps you to problem solve, find potential solutions, test the solutions. And I think that's really critical for us. I've done, even in heritage work, a lot of the things that I've written, I write it and then I give it to younger people and I say, okay, work with it. And then they do something that completely blows my mind through their improv work, because they have a different experience of the culture that we're writing about.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is a party dynamic learning process. And I think that it's really important that we allow the voices and the experiences and the ideas of our participants to come through, even if it's through the improv itself.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then when you think about a thread, is there a thread in your mind that weaves through all of these elements of you, all of pieces of the puzzle? Is there a commonality?
There kind of is. You know, whether I try to do it or not, what always ends up happening is this pull towards heritage and culture and who are we. I don't present stories about heritage from one narrative or perspective,
Mm.
because I think that we've been in a situation for too long where somebody else has always been telling our stories. So for me, it's always been about that. And again, the process is very important to me. So when I'm writing, I don't write from my head. I write from the voices of people that I speak to. It's very much an oral history project as well. So a lot of the stories that you see in my plays tend to be based on actual stories that I've heard from my elders. Because for me, that oral history is just as important as the written history that was in some cases written by our enslavers.
Mm-hmm.
They don't tell the truth about who we are, you know? So I tend to I've done some plays that are not particularly historical or heritage based upfront. But even if that's the case, whatever I present in that play is still going to be questioning, who is this person? How do we represent this person's story and do justice to it? You know, so that's a common thread for me, this idea of representation, this idea of really doing justice to identities of peoples. Um, and, you know, especially when it comes to marginalized peoples or forgotten cultures, I'm very, very specific about that, even in terms of my students and any actors that I work with. I tell them, you can't act in my play unless you have done your research. Don't come and tell me this is a character you've made up in your dreams. Go home, do your research. Whether that research is online, from books, from talking to your elders, do your research, because I had to do mine as the writer. You may find something that challenges what I've shown. That's okay. The point is, we are doing justice to these people's stories.
Awesome. Thank you.
But I have a question that's mainly about generations, because my real first introduction to West Indian, to Anglophone Caribbean theater, came through a remarkable Jamaican woman named Honor Ford Smith. I met her, and I don't know whether it was 1978 or 1979, when we first had a chance to speak and share some ideas. And this is the almost a decade before I would run into Raul, to Kendall, to even 2 decades before I would meet Danny, and
Yes.
before I'd met Walcott, and all kinds of things. But so I knew things that were happening, particularly the work of Honor and Sister, and things that were happening, but that particular generation, people who are my age or older, these many of whom now have passed, but it was a wonderful time in Caribbean theater. And I just want to know your assessment of is there a generation like that now? Is there a generation you can call your generation, and yet your generation is now very established, and your generation, and then perhaps a younger generation? And what can you tell us about them?
So I'm going to answer your question, Lowell, specifically in context to Barbados, right? Because I think Barbadian theatrical history is one element of Caribbean theater that's rarely discussed.
This is
That
true.
generation that you're talking about, that's my father's generation as well. That was a generation where we would have seen the likes of Earl Warner coming up, right?
Yep.
My father was actually Earl Warner's teacher.
Okay.
And we saw a number of greats coming up here in Barbados out of that generation, out of the Barbados Writers Workshop, which my dad started. And a lot of people also would have gone off to School of Drama in Jamaica, and then they came back. And what I have a problem with is the fact that a number of the elders in that generation in Barbados, and I think the reason I have a problem with it, let me say this first, is because I came up with people like Rawl and Louis and Danny, who were always so willing to share and embrace and learn from the youth as much as they were giving. I found in my interactions that a number of people in that older generation are cut off from the rest of us. I am one of the fortunate ones, I suppose, because I have my father, but there are others who don't necessarily have that immediate contact with an elder in theater in Barbados. And there's some kind of a disconnect that happened, I think, after the 80s. So we had this major upheaval of theater in the 70s, and then Carrie Festa happened in Barbados in 1981. And, wow, all this stuff was happening. And then there was very little support, and theater died. I shouldn't say it died. It kind of just went down. It was still happening, but it was not as regular as it was before. We have one particular company here that has actually been doing theater every single year since, I believe, the 80s. They've been doing every year a production up until the pandemic. And I remember saying to the director of that company, clearly you have a model that works. Would you be willing to mentor a younger person? Share your model, say what's working, so that we can continue, because you are of an older generation who is going to take over when you go. That was about 10 years ago. The model has not yet been shared. Mm-hmm. And so they're kind of holding on to this idea of the glory days of Earl Warner. They're holding on to the glory days of Writers' Workshop or whatever. And they're not sharing with younger people, or at least they were not sharing with younger people. What I think has happened now, because through the work we're doing at the college, we do have a course called Caribbean Theater. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is to bring those elders into the school setting. Let them talk to the students, let them explain to the students, and allow the students to question them about what worked and what didn't work, so that you have that sharing of the generations. There is now in Barbados a generation of us, I think, I don't know if I want to say in my age group, because it's pretty wide. The age is, it's not necessarily within a 10-year age range, but there is a generation now. If we forget the last 2 years of COVID, but there is a generation that has been working, that has been developing. And I think that a large part of why that has happened is because we have institutions like Barbados Community College. We now have a theater program at UWI Cave Hill here in Barbados. And then those who would have gone to Trinidad or Jamaica or wherever else internationally to study and have come back, you've got this generation of people who all have degrees in theater. And so what happens is people are no longer seeing it as just a hobby. It's not just something that you do, outside of your regular job, although most of us do because we can't afford to live in theater, but I think that the respect for theater has grown because you have people who are actually studying it academically and saying, let's not look only at the theater that's happening on the stage. Let's look at how we can use theater for developmental purposes, how we can use theater for training purposes, for rehabilitation purposes. And so you have people now who are doing that. And so the respect is there, and you're hearing people now talking more about theater. There's also, the generation that's coming up, and they are not as passive as some of us might have been in our younger years. They are fighters, and they are the ones who are getting up and saying, if you don't take me on here, I am going to leave and go somewhere that is going to take me on. So one of my students is now playing Simba in West End and Lion King because he can't get opportunities in Barbados. So he's like, okay, see ya. He's gone. A number of them are in the US, and across Europe as well. They're going to look for opportunities. And then there are those who are also willing to stay here and fight for the development of the art form. I do think that, and I keep saying this to my colleagues, we have a responsibility now as my generation to not make the mistakes that those who went before us made in terms of not sharing, not documenting, because I can go back and find information on theater in Jamaica and Trinidad in a heartbeat. I can find it easily. I can't find that information on theater in Barbados. They didn't document it. You know, my father's now trying to digitize his plays because, of course, all of them were done on typewriters. So in some cases, he's lost pages of work that he's trying to recreate so that he can digitize the work. So we are now in a position where we're trying not to have that break between the generations, because I think that that was something that really impacted our art form quite significantly here. I don't know if that answers your question, Lowell.
No, it does. It really does. I think it's a remarkable answer. I'm very, very pleased, because the other thing, but this is just a comment, and maybe you want to comment on the comment, is that the perhaps, you know, using open channels can get more information out there, because I really only know you and Yvonne. If I'm going to talk about contemporary writer practitioners, producers in Barbados right now, I know you and Yvonne, but I don't know other people. And I think it's really essential that the stuff, that names get out, the productions get out, that information
Absolutely.
gets out.
And you know, that's also a funding issue here. You know, I work at a college, but we don't really get significant funding for our productions. And so we don't have, for instance, a strong marketing plan. You know, we kind of do our own marketing, we word of mouth, we do what we can on social media, but we don't have someone dedicated to marketing. The college isn't set up in that way. The university has a bit more leverage, I think, than we do. But a major part of why you don't see or hear about a lot of the other practitioners is because we don't have the support. And we keep saying we want people to recognize that a lot of artists are not necessarily business people. We want to create the art. We don't think about how do we market this, how do we document and archive it, how do we fund it. We don't think about those things, right? I'm saying we as a collective we, because there's some of us who do, you know, but a lot of artists here really don't necessarily have the skill set to be able to do the business side of it. And so they're not getting their work out. I have the skill set for the business side, but then I don't have the skill set for the social media side. So I kind of fall on the social media page because my generation is that sort of, you know, bridge between no social media and then wow, social media, and I'm caught in the middle. So I'm not very strong on social media at all. But you know, we do need to look more at how do we get ourselves out there. Yvonne, as you've mentioned her, actually has just done this fantastic text.
Okay.
You know, and it is actually a collection of monologues and stories from around the region. Because of that, a couple of us here in Barbados are going to get our work published or have got our work published in an anthology that is going regional. I don't think anyone, I mean, Lowell, you're different, you know, because we've had contact before, but I am not that well known either.
Okay.
You happen to know me because we're in the same circle.
Yeah.
But
in that circle, in just a sentence or two, can you tell us what CaribNet was, number one, and number two, because the original purpose of CaribNet was to do all of this, the background stuff, to support production and move production around the regions. And is there any sense in which CaribNet could be revived, or could in fact open channels perhaps began to take over some of the functions that CaribNet once had, let's say a decade or so ago when we were working with it?
I think CaribNet really was about connecting artists regionally and providing that kind of support, not just for productions, but also for thought to, be exchanged. So it was a chance for us to sit down and reason together. It was a chance for us to see what was happening in different cultures and to explore and express. The difficulty with CaribNet, I believe, and I say this with a heavy heart, I do believe that CaribNet would have been kind of spearheaded in that form by Rawl. And I believe that a lot of people who came onto CaribNet came on because of loyalty to Rawl and did not necessarily buy into the full vision of the institution. And so when Rawl retired, so to speak, and I became president of CaribNet, even though Rawl endorsed me as president, the number of people who still had that loyalty dwindled significantly because
You're the miserable vice president. You're the miserable vice president.
no, my vice president was wonderful. But the thing is, people knew the name Rawl Gibbons. So when you got an email from CaribNet signed by Rawl Gibbons, people paid attention. Nobody knows Michelle Hinkson, Michelle Cox, however you choose to put my name. Nobody knows that name regionally, except for a couple of people in Trinidad, some people in Trinidad, in Barbados, maybe, a few in St. Lucia, Lowell in Puerto Rico, but people don't know my name. And I think that was a large part of why CaribNet kind of dwindled. The loyalty was to the person and not to the institution.
That could be. Okay. Well, thank you. This is wonderful. For me, this is a wonderful, wonderful conversation. You guys have to get back into this.
Yes, it is a very great conversation.
Just to say that I do think that in terms of reviving CaribNet, I don't think it can be revived in the form that it had previously. And I do think that open channels is an opportunity for us to merge, number one. But aside from merging, I think it's an opportunity for us to look at that collaboration and see, because open channels works. It actually works, but to see how we can work together now, bringing that English-speaking side of the Caribbean into the fold. So I do think that there's definitely opportunity there, not necessarily for reviving it as it was, but for moving it forward into a new dispensation.
Perfect. Nilo.
I really, really enjoyed hearing the questions you both asked and the answers that Michelle did. Since it has also, I wanted to thank you for speaking about the documentation. Also, I agree that it's very, very important because it's the way of transmitting the knowledge and the
Just turning on my mic.
agency. Yes, the agency to other generations, right? I don't know, Matt, if you agree to make some more questions or to begin with kind of an ending of the interview, because I wish I could answer question. Sorry, I wish I could ask something about the political borders, since that's been the topic of the last part of the discussion. Because the development of popular arts is very diverse in the Caribbean due to its colonial past, languages, and its cultural and social vindications, which is very particular in each one of them. Recently, for example, Barbados has been in the news worldwide for cutting its ties with the British monarchy. Does politics influence the practice of the popular theater of the Caribbean and the diaspora? Michelle?
Absolutely, it does. Whether deliberately or not, we are impacted by it in one way or another. The it's a funny question, Nilo, because arts and politics they could go hand in hand, and at the same time they shouldn't go hand in hand. Because it gets so messy, right? You have a situation where when you have a government who supports artistic development, the arts will flourish. You know, you find that money's getting pumped into the arts and that kind of thing. But then when that government is no longer in power, and the next government might not have the same interests, what happens at that point is that you find the support dwindles, your financing dwindles. And so, in as much as we are connected to politics, and certainly there are going to be political, because I mean, art reflects life and everything that's happening in politics. And if you've seen the memes, we're having elections here next week. You know, the memes that are coming out are hilarious, but they're also artistic representations of what people are experiencing and the way that people are interpreting what they're experiencing, right? So art is going to reflect life, and certainly theater is no different. We are going to be able to, at some point, reflect and put some of the things that are happening, even with breaking away from the monarchy. And I'll tell you, that whole process of becoming a republic, because there was a grand celebration, the number of artists who got money,
Wow.
myself included, it was insane in a good way. Like, we got paid. Everybody was just going like, yes, we're getting paid,
Huh?
because we'd not been paid for so long.
Huh?
Um, you know, we'd not seen, for instance, because of COVID, a number of our artists had not worked for 2 years. And so when you have a political party that says we see the value of artists, you know, yes, we're going to be influenced by that. At the same time, politicians, I think, need to have a bit of a stronger back, because yes, you support us, but we also need to be free as artists to critique you, because a part of what we do as artists is to critique what's happening in society. And it's unfortunate that in some cases you have artists who are afraid to say certain things for fear of victimization. And I'm not saying that that is the case in the context to the current government in Barbados. I'm saying this is the case generally. Um, People don't want to upset the apple cart, you know, because if after you've just been paid money by a particular institution, you don't want to go out and speak badly against them and then you never get work again. And so there's a very delicate balance which can become very messy when you merge the art with the politics. And it can be good, but it can be bad. I think one of the things that I've admired about our current prime minister is that she is able to laugh at herself. So she's seen some of the memes which have, I suppose, in some ways made a joke at her, but she's able to laugh at it. She's able to say, okay, yeah, it's funny. You know, she's able to do that. A lot of people, okay, no. A lot of people are way too sensitive and take things way too seriously. And while they are to be taken seriously to a point, we need to be able to laugh at ourselves. And I think some politicians have lost that ability. So it's a balance, Nilo. It really is a balance. And I don't think it's an easy task to find that balance. But so far, I've been able to, I'll be honest, I stay clear of political topics. I don't even comment on what's happening politically in the country, because that's not my thing. But at some point, it's going to come up, and we have to find a balance.
Wow, Michelle. Hearing you, I and hearing the former interviewees, I could say that precariousness of artists is a specific part of colonial politics,
That's
and it's very
exactly it.
sad because it reaches so many regions. However, I think it is changing. It is too big to be
Absolutely.
controlled. The cultural and artistic and intellectual manifestations and prior documentation and ancestors, right, which helped us so much. For example, Lowell and Math taught me a lot of things. especially Lowell at Puerto Rico. Finally, if there are no more questions, I wanted to ask you about your what are your projects, your new projects in your plans for the future.
Um, yes, I do have some new projects on the horizon. I don't know how much I can say because none of it is really finalized as yet, but I am looking at potential international collaboration in Scotland. Um, Again, historical based collaboration and looking at how we can use immersive theater to explore historical topics that affect um, marginalized or previously and perhaps even currently oppressed groups. Um, so that's still being discussed. It actually was just it was just pitched, I think, in November. Yes, in November, the end of November. So we're going into discussions now about how to make that work. But that is one of the major things that I'm going to be working on. In addition to that, I'll be continuing the heritage theater work and expanding that work with the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. Um, we have some things in the works that I mean, I hope they can happen this year. You know, again, COVID. So our work there has been more or less put on hold for the last 2 years, but we've been using that 2 years to plan moving forward. So we have some ideas for work coming up with them. We're looking to expand the topics because a lot of what we've done at the museum has been, like I said, historically focused. So it might be folk songs and looking at the origins of folk songs, or it could be based on a particular personality or a period in our history. But we also want to expand it to recognize that today's experience is tomorrow's history. So we don't necessarily only want to go far back in time. We want to look at our more recent history as well, archiving those stories. Um, and of course, hopefully, Lowell and Matt, hopefully finishing this darn PhD. And it's a journey because I'm trying to use the work that I'm doing in heritage-based theater in the PhD. Um, so it's all kind of interconnected in that sense, but definitely hoping that I can. I mean, my dream really is to be able to travel and to share the ideas, share the work. My work is very much Barbados and Caribbean focused, but certainly I would love the opportunity to be able to expand that not only into the diaspora, but understanding that we have other marginalized and oppressed groups even outside of the Caribbean and African diasporas. And really want to look at that work. The Scotland one has a special part in my heart. It's really close to me because it's also my heritage. So you see, it still kind of fits back in
Uh,
because my family is of Scottish heritage.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it still for me kind of goes back to archiving my family's history. Everything
Yeah.
ties right back into that.
Awesome.
So that's where I'm hoping to go.
Awesome.